The auditorium shimmered with excitement, filled with proud families, flashing cameras, and the soft rustle of graduation gowns. It was the kind of day people remembered forever, the kind they framed and hung on walls. I should have felt happy. I should have felt proud. Instead, my eyes kept drifting to one place, seat number 18, empty. That seat was meant for my parents. I had saved it for them weeks in advance, imagining how my mother would wave at me with teary eyes, how my father would sit tall with quiet pride. I had pictured this moment 100 times walking across the stage, hearing their voices rise above the crowd. But now there was nothing, just an empty chair that seemed louder than all the applause in the room. "Hey, your family here?" a classmate asked, adjusting her cap as her parents stood behind her, smiling. "Yeah," I lied softly. "They're around." She nodded, distracted, already turning to hug her mother. I looked down at my phone again, no messages, no missed calls, just silence. Then suddenly a notification popped up. My heart lifted for a second until I saw it. A photo, my mother had posted it. There they were, my parents and my younger brother, sitting in a brightly decorated restaurant. Balloons floated behind them, and a chocolate cake sat on the table. My brother grinned, holding up a small trophy. The caption read, "Celebrating our son's big win. So proud of you." My fingers froze around my phone. Today was my graduation, the day I had worked years for, and they weren't just absent, they were celebrating something else. Celebrating him, my throat tightened as the realization settled in. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't an emergency. It was a choice. Next up, the announcer called my name. The sound barely registered. I stood up on instinct, my legs moving without me. The walk to the stage felt longer than it should have, like I was crossing a distance far greater than a few meters. The applause came, loud and cheerful, but it didn't reach me. I shook hands, accepted my diploma, and forced a smile for the camera. Somewhere in the crowd, families were cheering, calling out names, capturing memories. No one called mine. When I stepped off the stage, I glanced one last time at seat number 18. Still empty. That's when it hit me, not just as a thought, but as a quiet, painful truth. That seat wasn't just empty today. It had always been empty. I just hadn't wanted to see it before. I didn't go home that night. The celebration continued behind me, laughter, music, the echo of happiness that didn't belong to me. I walked out of the auditorium still wearing my graduation gown, my diploma clutched tightly in my hand like it was the only proof that the day had even happened. The streets were quieter than I expected, or maybe it was just me. I kept walking, not really knowing where I was going. The world felt distant, blurred at the edges, like I was stuck between something ending and something I didn't understand yet. Every now and then, my phone lit up, messages from classmates, "Where are you? Let's celebrate. Dinner with family, join us if you're free." I typed replies, then erased them. Typed again, then deleted everything. I wasn't free. Not really. Hours passed before I finally sat down on a cold metal bench beneath a dim streetlight. The night air wrapped around me, heavy and still. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to breathe. That's when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment before opening the message. "Sorry we couldn't make it. Your brother needed us. We'll celebrate yours later." Later. I read that word again and again. Later, it sounded so simple, so harmless, but to me, it felt like a lifetime of being pushed aside, wrapped into a single word. Later was every missed moment, every time I had been told to wait, every time my achievements had been quietly overshadowed. I leaned back against the bench, staring up at the faint glow of the streetlight. Memories began to surface, small things I had ignored for years. Birthdays where my brother's gifts were bigger. School events where my parents arrived late or not at all. Moments where I had smiled and said, "It's okay," even when it wasn't. I had spent so long convincing myself that love didn't need to be equal, that understanding was enough. But sitting there alone on the most important day of my life, I finally saw the truth clearly. It wasn't about one missed graduation. It was about a pattern, a choice they kept making, and a place I kept accepting. Something inside me shifted not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a door closing. I realized I didn't want to keep waiting for later. I didn't want to keep hoping that one day they would see me the way I had always wanted, because hope, when it's ignored long enough, starts to hurt more than the truth. I looked down at my diploma, my reflection faintly visible in its cover. For the first time that day, I spoke out loud, even if no one was there to hear it. I deserved to be there. The words felt unfamiliar, but they were true, and maybe that was where everything began to change. The first few weeks after I left were the hardest. Everything felt unfamiliar. My small apartment, the silence, even the way time passed. There were no voices calling from another room, no background noise of family life. Just me, alone with my thoughts. At night, doubt crept in. Had I overreacted? Was leaving too much? But then I would remember that empty seat, and the doubt would fade into something steadier, determination. I started with what I had. My degree, a few savings, and a quiet promise to myself. I will not go back to being invisible. Days turned into a routine. I woke up early, worked long hours, and pushed myself harder than I ever had before. I took every opportunity, even the ones that seemed too small to matter, because now everything mattered. There was no one else to rely on, no one else to impress, just me. At first, it was exhausting. Rejections came often. Emails unanswered, efforts unnoticed. Some nights, I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by papers and half-finished plans, wondering if I was chasing something that would never come. But pain has a way of sharpening focus. Instead of giving up, I leaned into it. I learned new skills. Took on extra work, stayed up when others slept. Slowly, almost quietly, things began to shift. A small project turned into a steady job. That job turned into recognition, and that recognition turned into something bigger. For the first time in my life, people began to see me, not as someone's sibling, not as an afterthought, but as someone capable, someone worth noticing, someone important. 6 months passed faster than I expected. One morning, I stood in front of a mirror, adjusting my shirt before heading out. I paused for a moment, really looking at myself. I looked different, not just on the outside, but in the way I carried myself. There was confidence there now, a quiet strength that hadn't existed before. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from my mother. "How are you? We miss you. You should visit sometime." I stared at the screen, reading the words carefully. They felt light, casual, like nothing had changed, like that day. My graduation, their absence, was just a small, forgettable moment. I typed a reply, "I'm doing well, busy with work." Then I stopped, that was all. No explanations, no reopening old wounds. No searching for something they still hadn't learned to give, because something had changed. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping for them to finally understand. Instead, I was building something that didn't depend on their recognition. And as I stepped out the door that morning, heading toward a future I had created myself, I realized something important. This wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was never less. I had just been unseen. 6 months after my graduation, I stood in a room filled with people who knew my name. Not as someone's sibling, not as an afterthought, but as the reason they were there. Soft lights glowed overhead, and quiet conversations hummed in the background. At the front of the room, a large banner stretched across the wall. My name printed clearly, boldly, impossible to overlook. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. If someone had told me a year ago that I would be here, I wouldn't have believed them. Back then, I was still searching for validation in places that never gave it. Still hoping for applause from people who couldn't see me. But now things were different. I had built this moment piece by piece, through long nights, quiet sacrifices, and a determination that had grown stronger with every setback. "Ready?" someone asked beside me, holding up a camera. I nodded. The flash went off, capturing a moment I knew would stay with me forever. In the photo, I stood tall, dressed sharply, holding an award in my hands. Around me, people smiled, clapped, celebrated. And behind me, my name stood out, clear proof of everything I had become. Later that night, sitting alone in my apartment, I stared at that photo. Then, without overthinking it, I opened my phone. I didn't type a long message. I didn't explain the journey. I didn't remind them of what they had missed. I just sent the photo, nothing else. Minutes passed, then an hour. The silence felt familiar, but this time it didn't hurt. Then my phone rang. Mom. I watched it ring for a few seconds before answering. Hello. Her voice came through, softer than I remembered. Is that really you in the picture? I leaned back slightly, my gaze drifting to the photo still open on my screen. Yes, I said simply. There was a pause. Then my father's voice joined in, faint but clear. We didn't know you were doing all this, you never told us. I almost smiled at that. I didn't think I needed to, I replied. Another silence followed this one heavier, filled with things they were only now beginning to understand. We're proud of you, my mother said finally, her voice trembling slightly. Those were the words I had waited years to hear. Words I had imagined over and over again, but now they felt different, not empty, just late. Thank you, I said calmly. And I meant it, but I also knew something they didn't. Their pride wasn't what defined me anymore. It didn't fill a gap. It didn't heal the past, because somewhere along the way, without realizing it, I had already done that myself. After the call ended, I opened another photo, my graduation day, me standing alone, holding my diploma, forcing a smile. I looked at it for a long moment, then I placed it beside the new one, two versions of me, one waiting to be seen, the other finally seeing themselves. And as I turned off the light, a quiet sense of peace settled in. Because this time there were no empty seats, only a life I had learned to fill on my own.